Alrighty, to prep for the new season, we're gonna literally go through every single tribe and comp and make sure we have an understanding of what the cores for every single comp will be, um, when you can essentially have direction, which we're going to be calling that enabled, and then core is when you've actually decided to go for a comp, and then we're going to talk about the like 5 or 6 units that you should be playing on your board in the late game to have the most amount of scaling. And this is really just a guide to kind of get you started on launch day, which is on the 29th. Obviously, there might be some changes to these, but these are what I kind of make as predictions for the upcoming season. So first, starting with Beast, really the only way that we're expecting Beast to play right now as a single tribe is based off of the Shimmermoth. The way that we want to kind of enable this would be any type of gem, or sorry, not gem, I'm thinking Quilboars, beetle scaling. So this would be something like Rune Progenitor or the Skitter in the mid game, and different units that can help buff those. So, for example, Skitter, like giving it Reborn or a Titus. For the Rune Progenitor, giving it some type of just Reborns and something like that. What we would call this, the like actual core of this build, is going to be Shimmermoth plus a like buff unit. So I think Stag is going to be the best unit when it comes to buffing your Skitter. However, there are a lot of trinkets that can potentially help do this. And then it's going to be any type of beetle summons with then the additional. So that's like your core would be Shimmer, Stag, and summons. Additionally, any type of beetle summons and really any type of death rally units are going to be add-on type cards, and additionally, Titus is going to be your exponential scaling to the comp. The next tribe will be demons, and really demons look like they might have two ways to play. Granted, one of them looks like it's going to be pretty bad. The way that I think they're going to be kind of bad, but there's potentially some playability there, is going to be the self-damage demons. So this would be enabled, or be enabled by having Wrathweaver and the new Ashen Corruptor. And I would say the core of this build is focused around buffing the shop and getting spells. So this would be your core 6 units would be Weaver, Ashen, the remade Baddie Terror Guard, so it's now a 5-drop. Bran would be, so that would be your core, would be the Weaver, Ashen, Baddie. And then your add-on units would be Bran, the Dream Inquisitor, and then Felbat. Felbat, I think, is actually going to be very important in demon comps in general this season because there's just not a lot of gold. So what I imagine the play style is going to be is you buff the shop, do whatever economy you have with Bran to try and buff the shop as much as you can, and then every turn you just consume the shop using Felbat. However, you get a couple of consumes off of the baddie. The other way that I imagine demons playing is going to be a more focused on shop buffing more permanently. So obviously the self damage does have that, like using Ashen to buff the shop. However, I'm focusing this one around Shadow Dancer. So this one I would consider enabled by having Baddie Terror Guard and a Shadow Dancer. And then the core would be those two plus Fellfire Conjurer. Fellfire Conjurer is the new one that makes it so your Tavern spell is given extra +1/+1. This is going to be buffing your Staff of Enrichments that you play. The add-on cards that I would say for this would be something like the Titus, something like Party Guest, and then this one would also have a add-on of Felbat. Really, the idea behind this is trying to get as many spells every turn and having those spells be focused on buffing the shop. So we use Party Guests as a means to generate more spells. We then make it so those spells are giving extra stats. Yes, you're only going to be getting like 6/6 off of the mugs. However, really you're getting 6/6 plus a Baddie Terror Guard consume, and the Baddie Terror Guard's consume is the biggest thing. And then we're ideally going to be getting 2 Staff of Enrichments off of the Shadow Dancer and Titus every turn. And then in your last couple fights, obviously you would sell Titus and play like a Leroy or something like that. Dragons, I see 2 playstyles. Mostly, these are going to be start of combat and then what I'm going to call Caligos. What I imagine you're going to actually end up doing is do the start of combat and then gradually transition into Caligos. And you'll probably potentially see why. So for the start of combat, the enabled for this would be Poet and Promo Drake. Um, I would say the core for this would be Poet, Ambers, and Promos. Eventually, the actual full comp for this that I'm kind of imagining would be once you have enough of the Divine Shields, you would sell out of your Amber Guardian. Eventually, your Promo Drake doesn't be enough scaling, so you're going to switch your Promo Drake for a Titus, and then the full core of this becomes Poet, Titus, Fire Scale Hoarder, Specialist, Fire Forged, and Party Guest. This whole idea is trying to get as many um, spells generated every turn, make it so those spells are buffed with the Fireforged Evoker. You can potentially also run Fellfire in this to make it so those spells are doing a little bit better, but the whole idea is get as many spells. Ideally, we're getting 4 spells every turn between Titus, the Hoarder, and the Party Guest. And each of those is now going to be giving an extra 2/2 in your Fireforged Evoker stats. I'll be honest, I think this is going to be the slower of the dragon type of comps. Where I imagine this kind of transitioning eventually is to a Bran Cali comp. So Bran Cali, I imagine it's going to be enabled by 2 things. Either the first enabled would be Bran and Cali. The second one is actually going to be Fireforged and some type of spell generation. I imagine the best spell generation is going to be the Ignition Specialist. But once you have either of those 2 cores, I think you can start thinking about going into a Bran Cali game. The late game for what I imagine this is going to be is Bran Cali, the Evoker Specialist, and then use Greenskeeper and the Spirited Whimser Drake as a means of getting a couple of shot buffs during the combat with Bran and Cali, and also that's going to be your economy to get a bunch more dragons. I think this is going to be the stronger of the 2 dragon comps. However, it's very dependent on 6 drops. It's using all 3 of the dragon 6 drops, so I imagine it's going to be kind of hard to hit. Next comp we're talking about is Elementals. Elementals, I only imagine there being 1 comp. Granted, it only uses 3 to 4 units. So take it with a grain of salt. Like, there's going to be a lot of flexibility in this comp because there's really only a 3 minion core, and that's going to be the end of turn buffs and then elemental cycling with the Unleashed Mana Surge. So what I'm imagining this comp's going to be is going to be Amplifying Light Spawn, Genie, and Unleashed Mana Surge. I would say you're enabled with this comp once you have Genie, and then your core is going to be those 3 6 drops: Light Spawn, Genie, and Mana Surge. Eventually you'll want to add on Drakari to this comp, and that would be your 4 minion core with Drakari as a add-on unit. And then from there you can run 3 tech units. That's most likely going to be 2 Leroys, and then just have a cycle spot for the elementals and try to finish on either a Venomous with like something like, I don't know, maybe the Deadly Spore or some type of just respawn Death Rattle type unit that can kind of hit off a bunch of Divine Shield or something. But there's really only that comp that I see as being possible for elementals. However, elementals have a lot of flexibility to get up to there. So I think something like Lockholder, Flush Forger is going to be good for getting you to that comp. Just because it gives a lot of stats every turn. Something like the Glowing Cinder makes it so your elementals get better stats. Something like Sand Swirler makes it so your elementals get better stats. And those are going to be ones you're going to want to pick up as you go along, especially once you have Bran and Genie on the board. Obviously, you'll want to Divine Shield your shop, all your minions using Elemental of Surprise eventually. Next, we're going to be talking about the mechs. Mechs, I see there being 2 comps, however, they're going to be very similar. The first one's going to be a magnetized comp. This is going to have Hollow Rover as the enabler. The core for this is going to be Hollow Rover and Electron Powered Up, the new 6-drop. And then there's going to be a bunch of add-on units. So the first add-on unit is going to be Marquee Ticker. This is good because it generates spells for your Electron Powered Up. The next add-on would be Drakari because that makes it so you generate more spells. The next would be Riggedy Repairbot. This is at the end of the turn, get a Magnetize. That pairs with the Drakari as well. And the whole idea with those units is we're trying to get as many Dr. Boom's monsters to be randomly generated from either the Hollow Rover attacks or from the minion that magnetizes onto the Riggedy Repair Bot. On top of that, we're then going to do as many spell generators. So this could be something like more of the marquee tickers. It could be playing the party guest or the 2-drop metallic hunter. And the whole idea around this is make it so we're generating as many spells to use our electron powered up, and those electron power up satellites are going to then make it so the the Dr. Booms that we've been playing are getting the most value off of them. Obviously, you're going to want to Divine Shield your entire board using Annoya module, and then Prosthetic Hand will also be useful to give you a little bit more utility with giving your minions Reborn. So you obviously want to do those two things across the board, and then make sure you're picking up any of the pants spells to untaunt after you use your Annoya modules, especially on your biggest units so they don't get Leroyed. The second comp is pretty much the exact same thing. The only difference is we're focusing more on powering up your board rather than getting a lot of use out of Dr. Boom's monster. And this is going to be via the Serena. So really, it's going to be the exact same comp as Electron because both of them are care about generating spells. It's just we're putting a little bit less emphasis into the magnetics generation and more into the spell generation with this comp. So the first minion would obviously be Serena, and I would say this comp is enabled when you have Serena and some Divine Shield, and you can say Hollow Rover is counted as a Divine Shield because it should eventually create one with a Annoya module. So then I would call the core of this comp as Serena, Hollow Rover, or some Divine Shield, and some type of spell generator. And those spell generators would be Party Guest, Metallic Hunter, or the Marquee Ticker. And really, the final board here is just Serena, Hollow Rover, a bunch of Divine Shield Metallic mechs that are generating spells. And then again, you can potentially put Kripparrian as a add-on unit to this comp as well, just because you have the marquee ticker. The difference between this and the previous comp is we're probably not going to be running the Riggedy Repair Bot. Instead, we would pick up one extra of the spell generators, and then obviously the Serena instead of the Electron powered up. In the late game, after you buff your entire board, you might even switch over from Serena to the Electron if you've gotten a couple of Dr. Booms off of the Hollow Rover. Next tribe that we're going to be talking about is Murlocs. Murlocs, I only see there being one viable comp. However, I do think this is going to be a very menacing comp, and that's going to be the Bream counter and essentially scam type comp. I would say that this is enabled once you have a Bream counter in hand and then a base skill on your board. Notably, this is a very easy comp to enable because it's just a Tavern Tier 3 and a Tavern Tier 4. I would say the core for your final build is going to be those two and a Bran. And then from there, it's just get as many of the base skills, as many of the Belchers, as many of the Breams, and as many of the Coral Murglers as you can. You can potentially also throw in a Merkbane Expeditioner from there. And then really it's just cycling things like Primal Full Moon, Lookout, and Tad to be buffing your beam counters in hand, and then picking up any Battlecry Murloc that also buffs your board at the same time. Really, this one's the hardest to say how your comp should actually fill up because it's really just how many of the death rattles you get. So what I'm calling this is you need to have at least Bran, you need to have at least base skill, and then it's just X base skills, X Bream counters, X Belchers, X Murgles, and you kind of just fill it in from there. Nagas additionally are another comp that I only see there being one build. However, I kind of want to call out that I think Nagas are going to be one of the worst performing tribes. And that's because they lost the ability to generate Nagas to make Groundbreaker have a lot of its extreme scaling. The main Naga comp I do see, though, is going to be focused around Groundbreaker and trying to make it as big as you can. This is going to be enabled by having the new 3-drops Coilsack Sapper and Weary Mage. This is going to generate you a lot of spells every turn. And then I would say the core of this comp will be those two, and either the Showy Cyclist is a really good minion for just stabilizing you in the mid game, and then if you find an early Groundbreaker, that will be your next strongest minion. From there, you have the 3 minion core. Let's just call it Sapper, Mage, Groundbreaker. Cyclist can flexibly be the Groundbreaker instead, so that's your 4th unit. Savjz will be your 5th unit, and then Bran will be your 6th unit, and from there you just cycle every single spell you can to make Groundbreaker as big as you can. And then you will also probably be cycling most of the Nagas that you roll into just to make your Groundbreaker a little bit better. Obviously, the best Nagas are going to be ones that have relevant spellcrafts for you. Something like Glow Scale will be pretty good. Fire Skill Hoarder is going to give you some shiny rings, so that's going to pair really well with the Bran. Something like Slippery Slider is essentially giving you a little bit of econ because it gives you a roll. Something like Warden of the Old is generating you gold. So that's kind of what you're looking for, is trying to get a little bit of value while you're playing those Nagas throughout the game. Next comp we're going to be talking about is Pirates. Pirates are going to be kind of interesting, where I see Gold Grubber as a way for you to get to the late game. However, I don't think Golden Pirates are ever going to be like a late game comp. I see Golden Pirates as a means to get through the mid game. What I really see the actual pirate comp is still going to be APM pirates, and this is going to be enabled by having Grifter and then some type of gold spending buff. This is going to be either Courier or the Corsair. And the core for this comp would be Grifter, that whichever of those gold like payoff cards are, and then Bran. The next add-ons are going to be a little bit of flexible. Dastardly Drust is going to be really strong, especially because this also buffs your Bran throughout the game. And from there, it's also going to just be any of the like minions that pay off from having buff stats. So that's going to be something like Blade Collector or Spacefarer. And eventually, you would probably sell off your Grifter. Once you've gotten to probably somewhere around 25-ish gold, probably even 20 is probably going to be good enough. And from there, you'll just play as many of these buff cards. I think the late game core, after you've done the Grifter like buffs, is going to be something like Bran, the Corsair, Blade Collector, Spacefarer, Drust, and Courier. Quilboars are in another interesting spot. Quilboars look like they might be the strongest day one comp until there's some type of patching, and I think there's going to have to be some type of patching. They have one of the strongest new 2-drops, which is Glow Gullet Warlord. This is the 2/2 that on its death rattle it summons 2 1/1 Quilboars that then play a blood gem on them. This is just extremely strong in terms of utility. They also got Corrupted Bristler, which is a death rattle summon a golem with stats equal to your blood gems. They have now Dreaming Thornweaver, which is a Avenge 4 buff your blood gems. So they're looking really strong as a in combat and then blood gem scaling comp. The enabled for this is just going to be any type of blood gem scaling. So that would be either the Piper, the Thornweaver, or a Pokey Thornmantle. And then the core is going to be the gem scaling, and then I would say 2 gem users. I'm counting Glow Gullet as a gem user, even though it doesn't actually want the gems played on it, but it gives you value from the gems with it. The main ones I'm thinking about is something like Corrupted Bristler, which is where it's giving you a death rattle for playing your the blood gems on it. After that, there's a lot of add-on cards that are going to be really good. One of the weakest one might be the Bonker, but that's going to be really strong in the mid game. In the late game, I think something like 3 Little Quilboars, Needling Crow, Bristleback, Titus are all going to be really strong add-on cards that make it so the gems that you're creating in combat are just as strong as you can. But really, the way it's looking like, you can almost run 6 of any Quilboars and you're going to be okay, as long as you have some type of gem scaling in there. Undeads are the next comp. They look like they might have 3 playable comps. However, all of them look relatively weak. The first one is going to be centered around KT. I think this is going to be something like KT, Morose, and Sin Runner as the full combo for this. Obviously, this would be have a core of KT Morose and then use KT to print Moroses every turn. Sin Runner, I think, is going to be the best add-on to this comp because every buff that you're doing is essentially doubled with its Reborn effect. And then from there, I think you can potentially think about adding on something like Titus and maybe Noisel. However, Noisel looks like it might be kind of overrated in particularly this comp. However, it is just another way to get some extra stats every turn. I imagine this being kind of like your mid-game kind of undead comp. I do think the best use you're going to find out of Kel'Thuzad, though, is to be able to duplicate your reborn unit. So you could, for example, put a prosthetic hand on your Catacomb Crasher, and now you have a way to print Catacomb Crashers every turn. Speaking of Catacomb Crasher, that's going to be our next comp, and that's going to be focusing on Overflow Undeads. Overflow Undeads lost their A-Bomb on Tavern Tier 4, so really the only way that you are core and enabled is if you have a Cadaver Caretaker or some type of, multiple summoning minion and Catacomb Crasher. The core for this, I guess you would also include Titus. So I guess the enabled would be the summons and Crasher. The core would be those plus Titus. And then it's really just trying to get as many Catacomb Crashers, as many Tituses, and then 2 taunted summoning units every turn. If Beasts are in, you would also add in a Reborn Macaw to that comp. The final undead comp would be centered around the new, or not the new, but around Deathly Striker, and this is going to be focusing mostly on buffing your attack and playing as many like reborn units every turn. I think in this comp, Drustfallen Butcher is going to be required because they've gotten rid of the what was it, I forget the 5-drop right now, but right now the only other scaling that's going to be in the season is going to be a Nubarak. So what I imagine the core for this comp being is Striker, some type of summoning units, and a Nubarak, and then the core would be Striker and a summoning unit. A Nubarak is probably an add-on. Titus would be an add-on. Drustfallen Butcher would be an add-on. And really any other summoning unit would be another add-on type comp. Finally, I think it's worth talking about some of the all-tribe comps. Really, there's only 3 of these that I can kind of think of. The first one would be around Nala. Nala, they made a 5-drop. So I don't think this is going to be quite as strong. However, it is worth saying that there are a lot more spell generators this season. Almost every tribe has a spell generator, and even if they don't, there's obviously something like the Party Guest that's a spell generator. So what I would say the core and the enabled for Nala would be Nala plus 2 spell generators. I don't think 1 spell generator is going to necessarily be enough for her. However, it's very easy to get 2 spell generations, especially because a lot of the tribes have a way to, like Death Rattle, generate a spell, and most of the tribes also give Reborn. The second one I would say is focused around the Party Guest, and this is going to be whenever you can run like a Bran or a Titus, depending on what tribes are in, and then most of the tribes have some type of spell buffing kind of effect, and what you're going to run for this is Nightmare, Party Guest, Titus, and then any type of like spell buffing type effects that are repeatable. Ideally, these are all death rattles, and from there you essentially want like a misplaced T-set type comp, where you have one of each of the spell buffs from the different comps. You can run 6 of those, and then you just cycle spells throughout, and then you can finish on something like a Leroy. Lastly, I think it's worth at least talking about where Poison Scam is. Interesting to call out is there is really next to no Poison Venom units in this season. The main ones are just Belcher and Deadly Spore, which means half of our like poison is dependent on Murlocs being in the game. But what I imagine your poison scam comp being, assuming Murlocs are in, is going to be something like base skill, a Belcher on board, a Belcher in hand, two Leroys, Deadly Spore, and then hopefully 1 to 2 like big units that you got from other ways in the game. And then you're really going to be dependent on getting upper hands as a spell to kind of take out a unit themselves. But again, it is worth calling out. There's not a lot of venom in this comp or in this season, and really the only way to get it is if Murlocs are in the board. So it is kind of worth calling out that if you are falling behind and Murlocs are not in, you are not going to have a lot of ways to kind of compete with comps that have outscaled you. So take that for what it's worth. It might be that we value something like the Deadly Spore and Leroy's a little bit higher this season because there's so little of the scam units that you're able to find. So, anyways, hopefully this gives you a little bit of help to just prep for the new season. Looking forward to the 29th, and we'll see you from there. Good luck. See ya. Bye.